Good morning, everyone. I'm Lee Hunter with the Georgia Department of Labor. I'm hosting this morning for Max Minutes, and we are so excited that we finally get to speak with Dahlia Shaewitz and Monique Bell regarding the power of people with disabilities. Do we have a little feedback there? If it's good with everybody else, it's good with me. We're so excited to have everyone here. Just wanted to give them a moment to introduce themselves. But before we do that, I'm going to go through some of our just kind of administrative stuff on the front end, and let's go ahead and do that. So the first thing, of course, is that we want to thank our anchors that made this partnership and make all of our programs possible. Max, the Metro Atlanta Exchange, started several years ago when, as partners in workforce in all of Atlanta, we realized that there was much more we could do together to move our efforts forward if we only understood and knew what resources and services we all did, and we could share that information together. So that's how this started. We are, again, thrilled to have Monique Bell. Monique is the Business Engagement Executive with Dodd Institute. Good morning, Monique.
Good morning.
And Dahlia Shaewitz is the founder and CEO of Third Sight, which is another organization. Good morning, Dahlia.
So first of all, thank you all for inviting me. I'm so glad that we were able to do the session this morning. I'm going to be talking about two research briefs that were published back in 2020. And I will share links to where you can download those briefs, because I'm not going to go into heavy detail about both of them. They are research briefs. I'm going to try and talk a little bit about them and keep it high level, but there's a lot of great detail that I won't be able to cover in this short presentation. My name is Dahlia Shaewitz. I'm founder of Third Sight, which is a small business that focuses entirely on disability inclusion. Back in 2020, we published a couple of research briefs. These are just images of the cover. I worked in collaboration with the American Institutes for Research. I want to recognize them, and also the contributions from the Ruderman Family Foundation. They are headquartered in Boston, and the briefs were actually meant to look at Boston compared to other similarly sized metropolitan areas. And one of those was Atlanta. So we had the good fortune of being able to spotlight some Atlanta data in today's presentation. The briefs reflect two corresponding issues: the earnings that result from employment of people with disabilities and the spending power of people with disabilities. So I'll talk about both of those things today. The first brief describes challenges to employment, challenges to pay equity for people with disabilities. And the second brief shows that despite high rates of poverty and low wages of people with disabilities, there's still really a significant market of people with disabilities. They have tremendous spending power. So that is part of the market for services and products that you all are selling to. And I want to mention we used the American Community Survey from 2017. If you're not familiar with the census, there's always a little bit of a lag time by the time they publish it, and then by the time you run the data. So these were published in 2020. They were written a couple years earlier using the 2017 survey data. One last thing. So we had done a couple of briefs earlier that looked at national and state level data, but we never looked at city level data. Metropolitan Service Area, or MSA, is the acronym you'll see on the slide. I'm just going to say city or metropolitan area just to make it easier. In my head, it means the same, but I know to researchers there's difference. And what we did was we compared earning gaps by educational attainment for these 10 metropolitan areas that are defined by population size by the census. We also looked at federal and state income tax losses that result from that earnings gap. So that's important on a policy level. So on the first slide, you see Atlanta highlighted in orange, or it might be red on your screen. This is the pay gap by disability status in these top 10 areas. And you'll see the largest pay gap was in Boston. So that was interesting for those folks. Atlanta actually has the lowest pay gap. And I have some ideas on why that is. It's even lower than the national average across the US. So that's good news for Atlanta. The next slide, I know it's hard to read. I really encourage you to download the briefs so you can look at the data in more detail. What it shows, starting with the top left graph, if you just sort of look at sort of where the lines go, people with and without disabilities, if they have less than a high school diploma, the difference in pay or salary or earnings there's a difference, but sometimes there's even a negative difference. In Atlanta, people without a high school diploma but have a disability are going to make more than people without a high school diploma but don't have a disability. So that's kind of interesting to know, but the numbers are pretty small there. You go on to high school and now you start to see the gap widens. Some college, it's about the same, and then associate's degree, bachelor's degree, graduate degree. Back in 2015, we learned that if you hold educational attainment equal, a person with a disability is going to earn less than a person without a disability on average. But if they have higher levels of education, a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, now that gap widens. And that was a big surprise to us. I will say, though, that compared to the other metropolitan areas, Atlanta offers greater pay equity than most of the other similar sized cities. Again, good news. This is actually my favorite graph, and it's a heat map. And what it shows is occupational type. So we looked at the occupations of people with disabilities across these cities. And one of the interesting findings was across all the metropolitan areas, people with disabilities are least likely to be found in a management position. So that's about 6 or 7 lines down. Management, there's a yellow dot there, that's Boston, but it's light green or yellow across the board. That's the least likely job for a person with a disability. Why is that important? Think about your managers. They are organizational leaders. They are, if they're not determining the vision and direction of the organization, they are implementing your vision of where the organization should be headed. They're usually the ones who do the hiring and the firing, and they offer models of leadership for their teams. So if you're missing people with disabilities in those management roles, you're missing a lot of influence for people with disabilities. And now I have about 3 slides. I'm going to run through them pretty quickly. They're data again. The takeaway on this slide is that this is the number of people with disabilities between the age of 15 and 64. So pretty much anyone who could work in most states. New York, obviously, big city, has the highest number of people with disabilities. Atlanta is sort of on par with other cities. But when it comes to prevalence by percentage, so what's the proportion or prevalence of disability in your town? Philadelphia actually has the highest disability prevalence, followed next by Atlanta. On the next slide, we're looking at those with a bachelor's degree or higher. Remember, I mentioned that as people get a higher level of education, the gap in pay increases. So sort of keep that in the back of your head. Now look at this graph. Disability prevalence by educational attainment. Washington, D.C., a full quarter of people with disabilities have a bachelor's degree or higher, whereas Atlanta falls somewhere in the middle of the pack. And as I noted in one of the other studies, that educational difference makes a difference in terms of earnings. But again, we're finding that with Atlanta, the pay gap isn't as great. So that's pretty interesting. The other thing I always want to mention, this is through age 64, 65 and up. Older people, they're still coming to your businesses, they're still using your services, and they are still spending money on goods and services. So let's talk a little bit about spending. I like to go over what is disposable and discretionary spending because I am not an economist. This is not the language that I speak. But market researchers and businesses often estimate what is the disposable or discretionary income of a group because they want to figure out what's the market size, what's the potential for market growth, what are the population characteristics of the market that I'm serving. So to understand the purchasing power of the market segment of consumers with disabilities as a whole, we need to know how much money they have, both after taxes and after they spent money on their basic day-to-day needs, right? So in essence, disposable income is your net income, your take-home pay, and people can choose to spend the money or save the money. They use disposable income to pay the rent, utilities, bills, basic food and clothing, right? And they also use it to build their savings. There are some issues around asset limits for people with disabilities in terms of earnings. That's a policy issue. It's a big one, but can also contribute to lower disposable income. Now, discretionary income, that's the amount you have after taxes and you paid the bills, right? So it's the extra. That means luxury items like dining out, travel, entertainment, other kinds of non-essential products. And I would actually put banking in there as well if you're coming from the banking industry. This is also a consumer of yours, right? So another way to look at the data is to compare the percentages of people with and without disabilities by discretionary income by metropolitan area, as shown here. Just one takeaway from this, there is not a single metropolitan area that has closed the income gap between people with and without disabilities, right? There's still a gap. It's still an important thing. And we made a point because we were so worried that if we published this paper about the spending power of people with disabilities, folks would say, oh, they have all this money. Well, why are we helping people with disabilities? They've got all this money. No, that's not the takeaway. The takeaway is, despite the fact that they're more likely to live in poverty, people with disabilities still spend money, right? They're still your consumer base or part of your base. So in the next slide, you've got a big table. I just want to point out a few things. Atlanta's, that second column in the table, so you can follow that down. And the United States national average is on the far right. So just think about Atlanta compared to the US. Nationally, people with disabilities have $500 billion in disposable income. However, the amount of disposable income that's represented by people with disabilities varies by metropolitan area. And it's driven mostly by population size, right? So you see New York. For example, Atlanta has a relatively smaller market size in terms of the aggregate of disposable income. It's around 9.7 billion because you have a smaller population. You look at New York, they have 30 billion, Los Angeles, 15.7 billion. Likewise, in Atlanta, the proportion of discretionary income, remember that's the luxury item spending, is held by people with disabilities. It's 3.8%. That second column's Atlanta. It's comparable to other cities if you sort of look across the row. But Atlanta shows a higher average discretionary income by other MSAs, which is somewhat, we think, a result of lower taxes combined with a lower cost of living in the Atlanta area. That means working age people with disabilities in Atlanta hold an aggregate of $0.9 billion. That's that bottom row that you see. This is higher than every other metropolitan area except New York. So that shows that there's a lot of spending power on the luxury items, on the services you provide that are beyond just covering the rent and food, housing, clothing, the bare necessities. A few other slides, and actually just one more graph, because I definitely encourage you to look at the brief, take a look at some of these data in more detail. Some populations have greater disposable income this is a graph by disability type. Some types of disabilities tend to have greater disposable income. Some tend to have greater discretionary income. It has a lot to do with which types of disability is more likely to be employed. So someone with a hearing impairment is more likely to be employed and earn a higher salary than someone with, say, a self-care disability. So that's the takeaway here. I think it's too hard to read, but I just wanted to make that point that it also varies by disability type. So if you're thinking about your market, you're selling assistive devices, maybe hearing aids, this is your market, and it looks different than people with an ambulatory disability. That would be true in cruise lines and all kinds of tourism as well. So implications from these two papers. We believe that employees with disabilities might be overlooked for promotion opportunities. We also know that people with disabilities hold significant income for products and services that you may provide. Another important thing to know is that people with disabilities and their families tend to be loyal to brands when they feel they're being served well. If I have a family member, and I do, with a disability, and they tell me, oh, these folks went out of their way to accommodate me, they provide accessibility, now I'm going to go and use that same product or service, right? Because I believe they're taking care of the people I care about. And if you're thinking about this as a customer base, your local economy will thrive when the public and private sector recognize that power and that influence of the disability community. And finally, what can you do? You can hire for diverse interests and insight. That's true even within the disability community. There's a lot of diversity. Market to those populations, create that long-term loyalty to your brand. Really important, design your product or service to be inclusive, right? Instead of just trying to meet a compliance or provide an accommodation, think about what's the highest customer service. And there are ways to also look at your organization internally, creating policies and procedures that support an inclusive workplace culture. You can be the champion in your organization, promote people with disabilities as colleagues, leaders, and customers, and be sure to measure your progress and celebrate inclusion. I will drop the link to this brief into the chat so you can download it, and my contact information is here as well. And I will turn it back to you, Lee.
Thank you so much, Dahlia. There's a wealth of information there, and not sorry for that bad pun, but not not just in speaking about that, but there's certainly a lot of tie-ins regarding the discretionary income that you mentioned, and policy development and economic growth with those populations. So there's a lot to unpack there, and maybe we can do that in just a moment. But now, Monique, it's up to you. Take it away, Monique.
Good morning, and thank you all for joining this call or this Zoom. It's really important to understand and know how you can get in touch and work with a facility, a nonprofit, when coming down to employment. Next slide. We're going to be talking about the power of people with disabilities. I'm going to be talking about how your company can actually gain revenue based upon hiring individuals with disabilities. Next slide. So BDI's mission is to empower people with differing abilities to maximize their potential by securing economic self-sufficiency, independence, and inclusive within their communities. Next slide. BDI's programs are job and career placement. We do family support, benefit navigation, and we are the only ones in Georgia that actually has the Georgia Community Trust. You can go to our website at bobbydodd.org to find out about these different opportunities. Next slide. We also have a management business services where we work with communities to provide them a low cost by hiring individuals with disabilities to help maintain that facility. So we have our call centers in College Park, where we work with a medical facility on billing for their medical supplies. We also have administrative services, supply chain and logistics. We have two facilities, which is based out of Atlanta and Jonesboro, where we provide logistic, warehouse, management, and supply chain. And if you're interested in any of this, please contact me. I'll be able to give you that information. Next slide. Okay, so this is what we're here about, right? The Work Opportunity Tax Credit for Employers. And I actually went to an employer the other day, and she's a small business employer. And she knew nothing about this at all. And it kind of shocked me. I actually gave her this information so she can attend, so she can learn about the Work Opportunity Tax Credit for Employers. Next slide. So what is it? What is this? WOTC. It's a federal income tax program designated by Congress to encourage employers to hire and retain applicants from disadvantaged target groups, okay? The program started in 1996. Now let's look at that target group, because it's just not individuals with disabilities. Next slide. Next. Okay, who qualifies? Anyone who's been long-term unemployment, a veteran, someone who is receiving food stamps or TANF, SNAP program is what they call it here in Atlanta. That is the age between 18 and 39. Designated community resident, age 18 through 39, living in the federal zone. So that for Atlanta would be like Metro Atlanta, Jonesboro, so forth. We already talked about federal assistance. SSI, these are individuals who are looking for part-time work where it doesn't interfere with their SSI benefits. Vocational rehabilitation referrals. That is going through, you know, your GVRA, your Georgia Rehabilitation Assistance Programs in Atlanta. And, you know, here in Atlanta, we have this thing about felons, right? And it really hurts us. While, you know, we went through COVID, we lost a lot of employees, right? And our HR might be in Washington State and not know the populations here in Atlanta. So working with an individual who's an ex-felon that might have had a felony 10 years ago can actually, your company can gain tax credits for that. So one of the things that I strive for is really educating HR managers when it comes down to felonies, and the laws in Georgia, right? Because you can have a misdemeanor here in Georgia that, you know, pops up on your background check, and that excludes you from that job. So one of the things that I try to educate is, you know, really looking at your HR policies and procedures and making sure that that's not the case for your company, especially right now in these COVID times. And of course, our summer youth employees, I just had the opportunity, I'm wearing my Grow shirt. I just had the opportunity to do a fabulous summer program for individuals with disabilities. We had so much fun going on field trips and so forth, and also preparing them for the workplace. We hired one who just graduated from high school, and love the warehouse. So definitely doing a summer youth program or working in partnership with a facility like Bobby Dodd to help train young people in the summer youth programs is definitely something that I would encourage. And, you know, for a full description of everything that we went over in this slide, please go to www.irs.gov. Next slide. So this is what we've been talking about. What's the value? The WOTC contributes to the bottom line and reduces the federal income tax liability for your company. It's an annual credit that is generated every year. The credits can average up to $2,400 for many eligible employees, with a maximum credit up to $96,000 for unemployment or disabled veterans. Do you hear me? That's a lot of money. So if you hire, let's do the math. If you hire anyone within that category, how much is your company? You hire 10 people. How much is your company saving or gaining? Fosters a positive relationship from employers in the community. Usually 15 through 25% of the company's applicants base falls into one of the target groups. An employer must obtain a WOTC certification before claiming any tax credit. Now let's talk about that. Next slide. All right, most companies usually have an HR, database, like ADP or whatever, that usually goes through this. But for some of my smaller companies, I want to make sure that they know. It's Form 8850. You can download it on the IRS website. When you hire an individual, you need to fill out the name, social address, and state. And for the original signature is required. Next slide. Any questions?
Thank you, Monique. Thank you so much for going over WOTC. That is a program that Department of Labor administers, and we are so excited to have another advocate within the Workforce Partnership talk about it. There's a lot of value within those credits, and as you said, most people don't know about it. I will say that people who use the large payroll companies like ADP, et cetera, they know about it. So they will automatically go through those categories with candidates in the onboarding forms that they use. But nonetheless, that is an automatic process through payroll. And so sometimes HR people are not aware of that. There's some excellent, valuable information there. Wanted to ask you all a few questions. Let me just check our chat board real quick and make sure I don't see anything. Okay, so far we're good there. Let's get some of these questions going up. And Dahlia, you touched on some of this, but research shows that the US GDP could be boosted by $25 billion if just 1% more of persons with disabilities join the US labor force. How could you articulate the impact, the economic impact to potential partners and for the state? You talked about the tax benefits for the state for income tax rolls, and also considering the significant workforce shortages, which is kind of a different aspect of that. But could you dig a little bit deeper into that? And is the state aware of this, and are they trying to work on this missed opportunity?
That's 3 questions in one. So let me see if I can
Sorry.
remember all of them. No, that's fine. In fact, maybe to work backwards. I live in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. I live in Maryland, and there's some states I work with really closely, Virginia, Massachusetts. I have worked with Georgia in the past. I know that your vocational rehabilitation system knows about this issue. And I think that the state agencies in Georgia seem to work really well across agencies on the public side. But what it looks like policy-wise in the state, I'm not as knowledgeable about as probably you are and your team. You had asked about missing out on populations. I will say, again, I can't speak to Atlanta, but I was working in another state where the unemployment rate was so low. This is a couple of years ago, even before COVID. It was so low that employers were opening up their minds to hiring people with disabilities and also returning citizens who had been formerly involved in the justice system. And what that told me is that those people were always hireable, but employers wouldn't consider them until they had limited options. And that's really unfortunate because people with disabilities, reentry populations, they've always been hireable. They've always been willing to work. They've always been able to work and ready to learn. They want to contribute to work. So the folks that you said, oh, well, those aren't people I'm going to think about hiring. Maybe you can open up to thinking about hiring them now. And this speaks to a different issue, which is really around disability awareness. A lot of us hold different kinds of biases towards people, including people with disabilities. And there have been studies that show that people without disabilities tend to assume people with disabilities are not as qualified, aren't as capable. That's a bias that just isn't true, right? People with disabilities just have a disability, right? It doesn't mean that they're less capable of doing the job. But now I'll go back to what I think was the first question about that impact, right? And it is in one of our briefs that you can look up. It was part of the reason for the presentation and making that case for employment and earnings, as well as the case for providing products and services. Those two studies, I think, go together really well. Bottom line, businesses need to make money. I'm a small business owner. I need to get more income than I'm putting out or I'm going to be in trouble, right? How do you do that? Design your products and services for people with disabilities so that you can sell more and you can earn more. Hire people with disabilities. That way businesses can ensure that their products and services are informed by the population they're trying to serve. More and more companies are doing just that. Web designers are taking 508 compliance training to ensure that their new websites are fully accessible. I just hired a web designer. He didn't know anything about 508 compliance. I told him my website has to be compliant. So he took classes, he learned how to do it. He is now more marketable as a web designer because of what he learned. Travel industry. Atlanta, I know, has a big tourism industry. Travel and tourism providers are creating accessible products. I know Marriott's developed this room for all kind of concept. Cruise lines are providing a lot of accessibility. They tend to have older populations with ambulatory disabilities. And just a reminder, people are aging into disability every single day. We're all going to get there eventually, right? So we want to make sure that we have access to the same things we have now. Also technology companies, I call them the big three, Google, Apple, and Microsoft are all hiring people with disabilities who are designing and testing products so they'll be accessible before they go out on the market and so they can sell more. I hope I answered all the questions. I think I did.
You did an excellent job, and thank you for pointing out how Google and others are working on their product line and how they're making sure that they're inclusive and that they will serve those populations. I think that's a critical, probably very missed opportunity from many companies. And thank you for attentively answering the questions, the various questions that I asked all at one time. I appreciate that. And now, Monique, this question is to you specifically, but how have the current workforce shortages impacted BDI, and what shifts has been experiences over the last year, the shifts in kind of how things have impacted you at BDI?
You know, BDI works with a lot of federal contracts, like, federal buildings and so forth. So one of the things that BDI did was we started up our own hand sanitizer for our participants. Of course, we were down just like everyone else. We partnered with a chemical company and was able to provide hand sanitizer to not only our employees, but to the community as well. We made it mandatory that because we do work with people with disabilities, that and we work with federal facilities, that you become you get the code and so forth, because we don't want our people to get sick. I think overall our senior leadership did a really good job when it came down to requirements, still now to this day, coming into the office. Of course, we have the rise in COVID now, so any new employee that comes in has to make sure that they're vaccinated. So I think we're moving in the right direction. I praise God that we didn't have any deaths, in our circles. And I think that our senior leadership team really did a good job, and they really try to, go with the state standards. So, but I wanted to piggyback on Dahlia. One of the things that companies can do is, reach out to a nonprofit and, ask about disability awareness. Because here's the deal, just because I look normal doesn't mean I have a disability. I could have been an alcoholic, which is considered a disability. I could have went through any kind of form of cancer, which literally is a disability. And maybe they're not letting you know about, their accommodations that is needed, moving forward. So I encourage companies to always, reach out and have a disability awareness training where individuals will come out in your leadership team and train them on disabilities, how to identify disabilities with your current workers, how to, make certain accommodations for them, and most importantly, have them, fill out that HR checklist that they have a disability. So I think society doesn't really understand if, different disabilities. They just look at a certain stereotype and say, okay, this person has a disability. But truly, I could have cancer 6 years ago and I'm considered, I'm in that realm of a disability, and now my back hurts, so I have to have a certain type of chair, right? That's an accommodation. So I strongly encourage that with your leadership team. Start out with your leadership team and work with your supervisors and have them, get that certification or that certificate saying that they went through that program for your HR files.
That's an excellent point. Thank you. Dahlia, did you mean to have your hand raised? Did you?
I did, because Monique and I, we bounce off each other really, really well. And
That's great.
what she's saying, and it's probably going to answer a couple of questions you already have, but I want to throw out there, in 2017, there was a study done of white collar workers, so office workers. 30% of office workers reported that they had a disability on the survey, but at work, only 3.2% were reporting that they had a disability. 3.2% were self-disclosing. Why? Three main reasons. There were a bunch of reasons, but three main ones. They were afraid of being harassed by their colleagues. They were afraid that people would think that they were not capable of doing the job, which is these are all real discriminations. They were afraid they couldn't get promoted. And we saw that data about management level. They're not getting promoted.
Mhm.
What does that mean? That means the other 27% are not bringing their full and authentic selves to work every day. What are there, 24 people on the call? Divide that by 4. I can't do math. There's a number there. And that's how many people on this call today may have a disability, but you might not know that they have a disability, like Monique said, because they're not telling you. And they're not telling you because they don't have trust. And Gallup is one of those folks that does surveys all the time about trust in the workplace. If you can build a trust in your workplace that people feel comfortable self-disclosing their disability, that's going to improve their productivity and improve your company's morale. Because if you're including people with disabilities, you're including people. And if folks feel that they're included, now you've just sort of changed the culture of the organization.
Right.
So important. And also building off something Monique said, in order for people to self-disclose, they need to understand how to advocate for themselves. So there's someone in the Q&A who said, how can we be partners in this? Talk about advocacy. Your thing. Talk about self-advocacy and do exactly what Monique said. Do some basic disability awareness training. Once you understand how prevalent this is, how normal it is to have a disability in the general population, then it becomes less intimidating or scary, and a lot more easy to accept. And then building off that base training, then you get into the detailed work that Monique's talking about. So thank you.
Yeah, and people may not even be aware that some things they struggle with may be considered an actual disability from a legal perspective, that would give them the benefits of some of these accommodations and considerations. And I'm sure that all of those things that you mentioned are very prevalent and serious issues that they would struggle with to bring them up. They try to probably just continue to function. Back to Mr. Barlow's question, and this is going to kind of feed into some of the other things that we're talking about. And thank you all so much for this insight. It's wonderful. But saying, how can partners who train and provide workforce experience for students and veterans with disabilities get involved? So could you talk about your processes, Monique and Dahlia, about how persons with disabilities get into situations where they may be assisted? And then he also has a follow-up saying, how important is it to teach digital literacy skills and tech skills as well? So if you could touch base on that.
Well,
2 questions.
Great questions. And we're tapping into that right now. So first of all, if you know someone who has a disability or is a veteran and they're looking for services, have them go to our website. We have an intake process there where we do an assessment of what it is that you're needing, and we provide those different opportunities or assistance once that assessment is done. Secondly, when it comes down to the IT, and this is, I just love this because Dahlia talked about it. We are launching at Bobby Dodd an IT course for individuals on the autistic spectrum, high autistic spectrum. Our program launches, I do believe, next week to train them in, different certifications like Microsoft is doing and Amazon is doing. You can go to our website to find out more about that. This program is free. This program is free to any high-level autistic individual, and it's virtual. So you can be pretty much anywhere to be able to do this program. So yes, technology is the key. It's moving forward, and just because you have a disability doesn't mean that I know the smartest people. I worked as an employment specialist. I placed them. Some of these young people on the autistic scale, they're so smart, and they're dedicated, and that's all they like to do. You know what I'm saying? They're just focused. So definitely check that out on our website. And if you have anyone that you would like to refer, go through that intake process.
Thank you. And then back to one of the questions about workforce shortages. Have you seen an increase in employers contacting you and partners contacting you to help place some individuals for their needs?
Yeah, yes. And Dahlia talked about it previously. So now what's going on is employers have to be creative to keep staff, because it's hard to find loyal individuals. What's going on is, you might go through the hiring process, and they accept the job, and they no call, no show, because they got another job making $2 more, right?
Right.
Where when you work with a partner like the Dodd Institute, where we customize pretty much our participants for that certain job, they stay longer, the process is easier, and they're an employee for life.
Mm-hmm.
So we are getting so many calls because now employers have to change up. And some employers we don't deal with. If I'm not willing to work at that location, my people ain't gonna work at that location.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So go ahead, Dahlia.
Oh yeah, I just wanted to, and a shout out to Dodd Institute. When you're a small business, so something like over 80% of all businesses in the US are small businesses. Over 90% of small businesses have 5 or fewer employees. They don't have an HR person. I don't have an HR person. I'm going to call Monique when I have a question, right? So, or someone in my state. There are resources like Dodd to help you figure things out. And I'm going to give you a real life example. I'm speaking to an employer, has about 60 to 100 people, waxes and wanes the size of his company. He says, I have no problem hiring people with disabilities, but I was interviewing this woman as she's deaf, and we went through the whole interview process. I gave her a job offer, and she said, well, I need a sign language interpreter as an accommodation. And he said, Dahlia, I could not afford to hire a second person to follow the first person around all day long and provide sign language interpreting. I said, you had no obligation to do that. You only needed to provide a reasonable accommodation. Maybe in your negotiation, you decide for all staff meetings, you'll bring in a sign language interpreter. Maybe you use web meetings, right? They have the free, the transcription now.
Okay.
Maybe you get them one of those phones that auto transcribes the voice while they're on the phone. There's a lot of different ways to do this without having to provide a full-time sign language interpreter. It needs to be a reasonable accommodation. And he said to me, Dahlia, I didn't know that. How would he know that? He runs a business. He's not an expert in disability accommodations.
Exactly.
Out here to answer some questions for you.
And also, as a side note, but an important note, vocational rehabilitation can often provide financial assistance with that assistive technology. Mm-hmm. So if an employer wants to hire this individual who is exceptionally qualified, but they're also thinking about the expense of some of the technologies that may be required, and maybe they don't know what these are, as you mentioned, then vocational rehabilitation can certainly assist with that as well.
And that's when
go ahead.
You contact, a facility like the Dodd Institute, mm-hmm. because we can help you gain that more quickly. Does that make sense? And we know the individuals that we need to go to make that employer feel safe, confident, and relieve him from what needs to be done. And most employers just don't know that.
Right. So we have a few more, thank you, Monique. We have a few more questions. Are there services for the visually impaired?
Yes.
Can you speak to that for a bit?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes. There's a whole department through GVRA that specializes in placement and accommodations and so forth. And what we do is we partner with them to help find employment opportunities for those individuals. So yes.
Wonderful. And Mr. Barlow also had a follow-up. They're graduating a young person who's 21 with special needs from an upskill Microsoft supported program. What tech job programs would you all have available potentially? Do you have employers that are coming to you for this requirement?
Oh yes, that's why we're having this class. You know,
Exactly.
and I'm well versed because I literally started out with Bobby Dodd placing participants. So, you know, through the COVID stage, you know, we have a lot of remote positions, you know, people working from home and so forth. And, you know, we saw a need in making sure that our participants would be savvy enough to be able to work from home and so forth. So that is one of the reasons why we're holding this IT course.
Wonderful. And then Nate Marsh had a follow-up to that, which is how you partner with employers. Do you have, I know you have employers that you work with on a regular basis. So I'm sure you have a list of those folks that are seeking assistance with that.
Yeah, and the list, you know, we want to partner for life. You know what I'm saying? Like we want to partner and make sure that our participants that we work closely with literally has an opportunity for promotion within the company, just like Dahlia was talking about, you know, to disability awareness training and so forth. So yes, we have a list, but we pre-screen.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
just don't shove folks, you know, in different directions. We have,
Absolutely.
you know, we do the ONET. I'm sure you're DOL, you know, so the ONET and things of that nature to really make sure that when we're placing our participants, they want to, this is what they want to do, and this is what they're going to be successful in.
Thank you. So we have another interesting question, and this may be the last one because we're running out of time. We have such great conversations about this topic, and there's so much more to this conversation. But Ms. Watkins asked two questions that are excellent. How do we request accommodations in the workplace beyond equipment, things like extended time on assignments and other understandings for people living with neurodiversity needs? And that could, you know, be somebody with attention deficit disorder. And that, I mean, that's my side comment, but do you have a resource that lists the types of accommodations that people can receive in the workplace besides equipment? How do you have that discussion with employers?
Well, first of all, if you're an employer and you want to find out about different disabilities, go to Dahlia, is it Jan? Jane?
Ask Jan. I'm not
Ask
Jan is.
Jan.
No, it's the Job Accommodation Network, Jan. AskJan.org. Lots of answers there.
Oh, that's excellent.
That is, I mean, I use it when I first came in because I knew nothing about different disabilities, and I tried to train myself on being able to place individuals and learning their accommodations, the accommodations that they would need. That's where you should go first off and look at. Secondly, you asked about, what was the second question?
It was talking about the list, but also how do you have that discussion with employers? The discussion about, you know, I have this individual and they may need some other
Accommodations.
accommodations,
Yeah.
like for time
Well,
on assignments.
Yeah, well, we work with GVRA, so I mean, that would be identified before we even talk with the employer, and we would recommend these different accommodations to better assist them. And we would give them the information or have, you know, GVRA assist with accommodating that individual.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm sorry to stop this conversation because it's been so valuable and very insightful. And I want everybody on the call to please, please do contact and reach out to Dahlia and Monique with any additional questions, and Joy will share their contact information. Any final thoughts, Dahlia and Monique, before I close up?
Just contact me if you have someone in mind for some of the different programs. Go to our website, check us out, and you know, give me a call. I'm here to assist and help.
Thank you.
I just want to say that all of you are doing some things right. Right? All you need to do is to continue to build on the things that you're already doing well. One of the things that I'm doing now is helping companies with doing a self-audit. I know audit sounds like a bad word, but it's really just an assessment where we're at, figuring out what we're doing well, keep doing those things. Where could we improve? What have we not started to do? Let's figure out what those things are. I also do disability awareness training, so sort of basic training just to get folks started. I think Monique's offerings are probably a lot more in-depth as well.
Oh, that's wonderful. And I love that. All of you are doing some things right and well, and we just need to extend that effort. Those are wise words, Dahlia. And thank you, Monique, for all of your wisdom as well. We thank you all for joining us today on this call. And if you're a member of MAX, that's wonderful. We're so excited that you're with us. If you're not a member, it's very easy to join, and you can just click on this link that you see right here, metroatlantaexchange.org. Join MAX today. You can find that and click on it. You can also reach out to Joy Wilkins, which you may have received an email from her, and that's how you knew about this event. And then there's just a quote from Jenny Ross from the City of Refuge about how MAX has assisted her with information about partnerships and how we can help each other. Here's some information about MAX and some of the things that we do, but mainly it's just the connections with each other as well, because there's a lot of value and insight and experience and wisdom within all of the workforce providers, and being able to share that with each other and with employers, and employers sharing their wisdom about the workforce and how they're experiencing the workforce is invaluable to all of us in the state of Georgia. So upcoming again with MAX is MAX Talks with McKinney's and Skilled Trades, Wednesday, August 10th, 12 to 2 at the Metro Chamber, and Rob LeBeau speaking. Lunch will be provided. We're very excited about that event, and special thanks to our anchors. We cannot do this without them, but we also cannot do this without all of you who are willing to participate with us, either as panelists on these events or as participants asking these wonderful, insightful questions. We thank you all for being with us, and we look forward to seeing you again. And take care and try to stay cool out there. Bye, everybody.